It's hard to decipher what the detainee is planning because her plans range from intricate and easily stymied to so crude and basic as to be unavoidable. She takes defeat and failure in stride like the privileged take victory. All you can do is pray that you escape alive and more or less unscathed from her machinations once you have found yourself the object of her attention. Criedmoo, Lanarktalon researcher, 4098 current age, just before his disappearance from an in-flight stratoplane. The time they've been gone isn't that big of a deal. Mantid and Trinarad technology can last 250,000 years with only minor maintenance that can be done with robots. Lanarktalon technology can comfortably operate for hundreds of thousands of years without supervision. Doubt me? Take a look at the precursor autonomous war machines. Wirodmoo, Lanarktalon industrialist, before vanishing while searching for the path of the traveler. Time does not matter to that which lie dreaming. Graffiti on Tunaru Prime. There wasn't a single foundation with 2 half-intact walls that shared a cornerstone for a quarter-mile. All of the buildings were torn apart, the hyperalloy support beams twisted, shredded, or shattered. The ferrocrete masonry of the foundation was cracked and discolored. The vehicles in the sand-covered streets were half-buried wrecks, most of them silently proclaiming they had caught on fire at one point. There were skeletons here and there, half buried in the sand or merged with the vehicles that had melted around them. The high-capacity ultradense capacitance gel had burned hot enough to reduce even bone to ash. The wind was fitful, more a light breeze than anything else. The air was dry, but had an ashy, bitter taste on the tongue. The small group sat together on a large block of ferrocrete, all of them facing away from the center, looking in different directions into the swirling yellowish fog that reduced line of sight to a few score meters. "How long since our last rest?" Lou asked. 8 hours, 14 minutes, 38 seconds from when you asked. We have traveled 32.3 kilometers in that time, moving in an east by southeast line, Quillick said, looking around. Lou grunted and stared at the bleached and bare section of wall that was high enough to have the lower section of a window space at the top. "Why did she put us here?" Hreckel, the Dr. Fulton scientist, asked in a mournful tone. "Whatever it was, for some reason she thought that we'd need soldiers to protect us," Lou said. "Fat lot of good the two of us are doing." Unvarak stared at the sand. It was gold with bleached white grains mixed in, something thick enough to create swirls, listening to the others as he thought about the travel so far. "I'm not rolling around in the dirt with a terror and getting my lungs pulled out through my jaws," Ch.24, the Strevikal soldier, said quietly. "I've had about enough fighting terrors for the rest of my life, thank you." "So where is your protector, Unvarak?" Lou asked. "The other 2 scientists have them. Where is your Imperial Guardsman?" Unvarak looked up. "You're right." "What?" Lou said, looking around. "Right about what?" "We've made an assumption that evidence does not support," he said. "What assumption?" Ch.24 asked. Unvarak got up and moved slightly away. "All right. We have 2 soldiers, 2 scientists, the Dr. Fulton pair and the Strevikal pair." He held up 3 fingers to indicate to the others to hold on for a moment. "However, that's superficial. The way of the means is not the front-line combat troops, like the Strevikal soldier is. It is true, we guard scientific expeditions, urban areas, logistical areas, and other such. We have other organizations that engage in combat with enemy nations," Lou said. Unvarak looked at the Strevikal. "I am a direct combat soldier. Infantry. Multiple deployments before my encounter with the Terror," the Strevikal said. "Several times against the Dr. Fulton, several times against my own people, several times against your people, Unvarak. The one time I was assigned a scientific mission was the last mission I took part in." Unvarak nodded and looked at Lou. "You weren't a direct combat soldier?" "Correct." The way of the means is more of a peacekeeper and law enforcement, only heavily militarized, selected by sex and genetic propensity, Lu said. I was determined to be a way of the means soldier before my eyes opened. I was put in a way of the means creche immediately. Unvarak held up his fingers. Then we have the scientists, he said. He pointed at the DRA. Fulton. What work did you do? Induction space research, the scientist said. Mostly on the higher bands as they're known, trying to improve DRA. Fulton drive efficiency as well as astrogation accuracy. Several of the fallen Confederacy's vessels and computer systems held tantalizing hints that I was researching. Unvarak nodded. He pointed at the Strevikal scientist, who was twisting one of the tiny molluscs onto the board. The Strevikal soldier smacked the back of the scientist's head. The scientist frowned and looked up. What did you do for scientific research? Unvarak asked. The Strevikal looked around for a moment, narrowing all four eyes for a moment. Salvage and examination of recovered and salvaged DRA. Fulton technology, primarily computer systems, he squealed. I have requested and been denied fallen Confederacy research assignment many times. I had to acquire Terra artifacts and data from non-approved sources and do my science in secret. Unvarak nodded. He turned and walked back and forth several times. What about you? Lu asked. I have spent over 60 years investigating and researching Terra relics of the fallen Confederacy. My research has been slow but steady, Unvarak stated. He pointed at Quillick. He is a highly skilled worker, a journeyman at least, of esoteric disciplines that none of us have any skill at. It would be easy to assume he is a simple menial doing work his betters do not wish to, or that could be replaced by a robot, but that would be an error. Unvarak turned and started walking back and forth thinking. So what? Taskapak, the Strevikal scientist, asked, still not looking up from the piece of computer equipment it had assembled from parts it had found over the trek. Unvarak stopped. By looking at only the superficial, we have come to erroneous conclusions. As if we just looked at the sparkle of iron pyrite and pronounced it gold, Unvarak stated. There are links, yes, similarities, yes, but the groups do not match one for one, and Quillick was our hint. How so? Lu asked. Rather than put one of the Imperial Guardsmen or a member of the Imperial Legions with me, Quillick was chosen, Unvarak said, stopping and facing the group, who had all turned to watch him pace back and forth. A highly skilled miner with training to work by himself with minimal oversight. Quillick nodded. A corporate virtual intelligence to keep the life support, power, and communication systems is all I need. I have the certifications and training to prove it. The Dremkillia smiled, then bent down and looked at the sand, tasting it for a second. Primarily silicon dioxide, but also with other contaminates. If I had a tester, I could give you the breakdown of the sand and the probably origins. The Dremkillia frowned slightly. I would not want to mine here, he patted the rock. This is synthetic rock. It is obvious by the lack of striation and patterning normally seen in rock formations of this type of pyroxene olivine and plagioclase. He smiled again. Basalt, a common aphanitic igneous extrusive, commonly known as volcanic rock. It is obvious with just a simple touch and visual observation that this is synthetic in nature. Unvarak nodded, taking it all in. Quillick pointed at the ruins. The synthetic rock used there is feldspar variant called granite. It is obvious due to the lack of striations that it is synthetic. I looked at it. It uses molecular and ionic binding to increase the strength of the rock nearly 100-fold. He looked at the others, still smiling. It would be impervious to anything less than high-energy tools. I would use a laser-sonic jackhammer combination along with reducing the temperature of the impact points to decrease shear tolerance to reduce it to rubble that could then be removed. So, it would take military-grade weaponry to destroy, otherwise thousands of years could pass and it would be intact, the DRA Fulton scientist said. No, Quillick shook his head. Try millions of years. The molecular and ionic bonding makes it highly resistant to weathering. Even if the surface was tooled to have a rough finish, wind-driven sand would not erode anything built with it. The minerals it is composed of make it immune to everything but certain high caustic molecular acids. There are no cracks for water to get inside of to freeze and widen the crack. Synthetics of natural rock, tooled to certain tolerances, are better than even ferrocrete, he shrugged. Ferrocrete is cheaper, even if you have to replace it more often, and has a spongy, molecular lattice, allowing it to flex slightly, making it better and cheaper for most projects. Unvarak felt like kicking himself. It was too easy to look at Quillick, drop 50 IQ points from him, and drop him in the box with easily replaced by a robot menial labor marked on it. It was doubly grating because Unvarak knew that he would have sought out an expert in practical applications just like Quillick in addition to geologists, if he had needed information on rock formations for his research. Everyone looked at each other as Quillick sat back down, picking up a handful of sand and pouring it from one hand to the other. Unvarak could see everyone's estimation of the fuzzy-faced Dremkilia undergo a sudden, almost violent shift. We need to look under the obviousness that we have all cloaked our estimations of the other members of our little group, Unvarak said. He sighed. While investigating and researching Terror Object, I have been forced to create new scientific advancements as well as develop and research new scientific theories. It has been my estimation that Terror technology is not only highly advanced, but seems to violate basic scientific principles because their science went in a different direction, and they were not dissuaded by apparent impossibilities or scientific dead ends. Unvarak moved over and put his hand on a rock. The Empire believes that any science that does not advance the Empire in obvious ways is worthless. He looked over. The Grenklakale Empire would not waste scientific investigation on a new type of synthetic stone. Stone is stone. Not true, Quillick said, pouring the sand from his right hand to his left. Unvarak could tell by the way his eyes moved that he was looking at how the grains separated and drifted from the hole. He looked up. One of the impurities to this sand gives it a higher static charge than normal, keeping more grains together than you normally see in silicate dioxide. Which means? Unvarak asked. Quillick shrugged. The grains stay together, closer and more of them. I would ask the mining station computer to modify fluid dynamic mathematics to model sand drift around the work site. Unvarak nodded. He turned to the DRA, Fulton scientist. Freckle, as a senior experimenter working with induction space, what knowledge do you have that might be applicable to our current predicament? Fulton closed his eyes, his ears flattening as he concentrated to get by the embarrassment of being singled out. The way of the means trooper shifted and began combing the fur on the back of his head with her claws in slow motions. Lately, I have been called in by the Empire to look over salvaged computer and drive systems from wrecks found by survey teams, he shivered. There are attempts to follow the path of the Wanderer from legends now that certain relics have surfaced that show the beginning of the path. What is that? Unvarak asked. Freckle shivered, and Lou pulled him back slightly, wrapped her legs around him, and stroking the front of his coveralls with her blunt claws as she bruxed her teeth softly in his ear. In the final days of the Second Precursor War, legend and myth, backed up by scattered records, claim that the Tunaru hero, the founder of New Tunaru, left known space to try to find a way to release the Terrors from their self-imposed isolation and imprisonment. She vanished with her ship after creating the Path of the Traveler, which is a series of safe and stable jump points from the Lost Council to the Fallen Confederacy that avoids Terror space. He looked at Unvarak. However, there is a lesser-known path, off of the Path of the Traveler, that leads to the location of the Terror homeworld. He relaxed slightly. Something that nobody has information on. If it exists, and I mean if, then the fallen Confederacy has either forgotten about it, lost it, or is not informing everyone. So, you've been investigating wreckage from the path of the traveler? Unvarak asked. Hrekkle nodded, the grinding sound of Lu bruxing her teeth seeming to relax him. Not all of it is Terra. Strangely enough, much of it is Terra manufacturing, but species consistent to what we know of today. He looked up. Some of it shows signs of having been recently manufactured. I have been examining it, hoping to discern how and who is manufacturing Terra drive and astrogation systems at random, he said. To limited success. Anirak nodded and looked at Lu. What about you? Surely you must be more than just a way of the means soldier. Lu waited a moment, then answered. I helped escort a prisoner to the Telkan system a little over 5 years ago. Unvarak cocked his head. What significance does that possess? The prisoner, a member of the scientific team known as Team Lightning Sight, named Oftakai and part of the Department of Exploration and Scientific Discovery, had a terror in his head, Lu said. She looked away, putting her arms around Hrekkle's waist and squeezing slightly. Hrekkle began stroking Lu's arms with his own blunt claws, bruxing his teeth in the low steady grinding in counterpoint to how Lu's bruxing seeming to gain a slight high pitch. That is impossible. The terror are all gone. Taskapak protested, looking up from his small creation. I am just relaying what I was told. The scientist had one eye that burned with a terrible amber glow. I remember staring at it and realizing that the DRA Fulton scientist wasn't the one staring at me with that eye. It was something horrible, something terrible, she shivered. Something deadly. Hrekkle patted her arm as she continued. The Telkan ceremonially buried the Terran in that DRA. Fulton's mind, told us that they would give him succor. She closed her eyes and shivered again. One of the Telkan told me, off-handedly, that more and more incidents like the one I was involved in were happening, and that it meant that the restless dreamer was approaching wakefulness. Unvarak nodded, turning and beginning to pace. Anyone else? Lu asked. She responded to Hrekkle's pats and traded positions with him, undoing her coveralls and tying the arms around her waist so he could start stroking her fur and rubbing the top of his face on her back. Ch.24 shrugged, looking down into the sand and drawing a pattern with the toe of one boot. Just being the sole survivor to an enraged terror killing several hundred of my people with his bare hands, the Strevikal looked up. Don't get me wrong. If it happened to me, what happened to him, and it was within my power, I would do the same thing. Look past what he did. What else? Unvarak asked. Ch.24 looked back down. I've been on a couple of worlds that the Terrors had been, he shuddered. A few years before the Terror, before that fateful night, I was the military escort for a group going to the Orkelia homeworld system. Unvarak thought for a moment. Didn't the Orkelia Union suddenly go extinct at the end of their war with the Edrock Communal? Yes, Ch.24 said. They gained a weapon that allowed them to cause a stellar mass to detonate and used it on the Edrock home system. He went back to drawing lines with the toe of his boot in the sand. They destroyed Edrock Prime, then went after the rest of the Edrock corporatocracy. It looks like the Edrock had some kind of doomsday plan, since a few decades later they were completely wiped out. Ch.24 reached down and picked up a handful of sand, letting it fall from his hand, staring at the way it fell. Planets stripped of their atmosphere, planets that had somehow been reverted to pre-Orkelia status, planets that were nothing but bombed-out overlapping craters and howling radioactives. He shuddered. I spent 5 years with that expedition. What did they determine? Unvarak asked. That the Orkelia were destroyed by someone more advanced by them, who was willing to track down even the smallest colony and wipe it out. It was estimated it took nearly 30 years, Ch.24 said. There was no sign of war machines, no space debris. He shook his head slowly. They were just wiped out. No rhyme or reason. just they destroyed the Edrock and then were gone. There's an Edrock colony out there. The Orchelia didn't get them all, Lu said. Ch.24 looked up. Really? Lu nodded. I heard about it from someone who was on the survey vessel that found it. They were warned to leave immediately or face the consequences. And? Unvarak asked. 2 ships ignored the demand and went further in system. There suddenly exploded from what looked like an internal explosion, and the demand was repeated. Lu tilted her head for the scientist to rub the end of his long muzzle against the side of her face. We left. Interesting, Unvarak said. He moved around the ruin, looking at it. All of us have encountered terrors outside of the laboratory. We've all encountered something from them. What about the trash? Ch.24 asked. He got up and moved to the scientist. What contact have you had with the terrors? Taskapak clicked a small button several times on the circuit board, sighed, and jammed the chunk of technology into his pocket. I have been examining DRA Fulton wreckage of one particular origin. Before anyone could ask, he kept speaking. Those DRA Fulton ships destroyed trying follow the path of the traveler. And also terror devices you could lay your hands on. Ch.24 spit. Taskapak nodded. Yes. I wished to do science on them. Did you learn anything? Unvarak asked. Part of him, doubting this scientist, could tell him any more than what the circuitry tasted like. Taskapak nodded again. Yes. I learned that terra molecular circuitry used wire made by stretching electrons out within a singular inverted deuterium atom that has been somehow bonded with a single atom of organosin, Ch.24, in such a way as to make the organosin atom stable. Within this molecule, additional electrons are stretched into a wire lattice that uses tachyons to change the state of leptons, allowing the rapid addition and subtraction that is the basis of Terra-Ornath computer coding languages within a single molecule, the Ch.24 scientist said. He patted his pocket. These pieces of technology are much the same, although much less complicated. Even this technology is far more advanced than anything we have. Even though we can measure it and even somewhat understand it, we lack the technology to replicate it or even utilize it properly, as we do not understand the scientific laws that govern it, since terrascience has a deeper understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe than my own people have managed to comprehend. While we know that the deuterium atom has been somehow inverted, we do not understand how or even why such a thing would be needed beyond a way to stabilize the organosin atom. Unvarak managed to keep his face neutral. And the Ch.24 scientist made a pleased expression. The terrors do not violate the laws of the universe, as many claim, but rather they understood more about the laws of the universe, perhaps even basic laws we are not aware of, including laws of the hyperatomic planes and how they interact with our own reality. It is my belief that the path of the traveler is dangerous to those who do not understand the laws of various intermingled and intermixed planes and how they interact with our own. Taskapak looked around, still expressing pleasure. Their engines were faster, with more power, used less resources, because they had a better understanding of the foundational laws of not only this universe, but the universes that border on, intermix with, and even surround our own. He blinked his top 2 eyes twice. I believe, although others say I am foolish or mad, that the terrors may have even understood whatever it is our own universe is expanding into. Unvarak leaned against the wall, staring at the disheveled Ch.24 scientist as he kept talking. The path of the traveler has a crossroads, Taskapak said. I have discovered this doing science upon DRA Fulton ship debris, as well as debris from Grenklikale Empire and Ch.24 Dominion vessels, as well as what terror artifacts I could discover. What crossroads? Hrekel asked. When you follow the path of the traveler to doom, or you follow the path that leads deeper into the fallen confederacy, near the Terror Tomb worlds, Taskapak said, his eyes getting wider, his ears upright and quivering, spittle flecks forming at the corner of his mouth as he waved his hands around as he talked. But so far, from what I was able to discover, no being or group of beings has been able to get past the first guardian. What guardian? Unvarak asked. Krekel and Taskapak said it together.
Magnus Oatsvorn.